Okay, let's kick this off. So, by way of introduction, hello and welcome to this Legatics webinar on how legal tech impacts the client-lawyer relationship. I'm Ryan, the head of product here at Legatics, and in a former life, I was a corporate lawyer for 5.5 years. I worked at Allen & Overy for a big chunk of that, and worked alongside some large organizations, and we're thankful enough to have a couple of people from those organizations joining us here today to discuss the topic. I'll let them introduce themselves rather than me making a hash of it. So Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Chris Grant. I am trying to hold on to my voice. We'll see how, I'm not normally this deep. We'll see how long it lasts. I am head of legal market engagement at HSBC. Doesn't really say much on the tin. Ultimately looking after our external spend, so thinking about sending the right work to the right place at the right price. I also used to be a lawyer, so let's not talk about that for too long. Moved into legal operations as quickly as I possibly could, because I was more interested in finding out how we could do things smarter, faster, and more efficiently, which often is not a desire, certainly back in the day within law firms, to try and think about how to do things in less time, but have now spent much of my career doing mostly that.
Awesome. Hi everyone, I'm Helen Lowe. I am head of operations for the General Counsel's office at easyJet, which again doesn't really mean a huge amount, but basically I manage the interfaces between our external supply chain, so all of our panel, as well as other specialist suppliers, but also the interface between the General Counsel's office and the business, ensuring that we're working cohesively with our finance, HR, risk, technology partners across the business. So that is my responsibility. I am not a rehabilitated lawyer, never trained as a lawyer, and I'm definitely not someone you want to leave in charge of a contract.
Much for the best.
Yeah, it is probably for the best. I think the best way to kick this off is a bit of what Legatics does and what we're trying to revolutionize, because I think a bit of what we're going to discuss on this panel is obviously to do with legal tech. But to start off with a story and how I got to where I got to and how that relationship used to look like. So I still remember being a junior lawyer, and an instruction would come in from the partner. You know, he'd won the panel bid to do a big deal for a big organization, and we would get started on the work, and quite often, more often than not, that involved a word checklist. I would spin up a word checklist, probably from the past deal. I would spend hours typing into it. It was quite tedious. I always wondered why what I used for a school geography project was being used to manage a large transaction, but you know, I was a junior associate and did what I was told. And you know, that would get sent around with documents and emails, and the client would pick them up, they would respond, the other side would do the same. And then we got to the end, we would bill the client and they would either say thank you or push back. It really depended on how the deal went. And that's always been quite traditional, and kind of what Legatics looks to do is, especially around that transactional side of the deal, is put it online. So if you think of the word checklists I used to use, we take those word checklists, put them online, make them digital. And I think we all know the benefits of going digital and using tools that are designed for a specific process. Like I said, Word has about 50 million features, of which we use 5. So we have features designed for lawyers to enable them to really manage the transaction. So that's that kind of lawyer experience of what the traditional relationship and dynamic look like. Chris and Alan have a much better perspective than me on this, because they were at that sort of higher level, which is discussing with the partners, with the law firms, why should we buy you? How much are you going to charge for us? How is that going to work? So Helen, do you want to kick us off? How do you find that traditional relationship? What does it look like at the moment?
I think the relationship with law firms is a really, really interesting one, because they are trying to change. It is a profession and a sector that is steeped in very traditional ways of working, and there's never really been a drive to change, I think, for a very, very long time. You know, they've quite happily sat there and, as anybody would, made some very easy money by continuing to do things in exactly the same way that they always have. And I think, you know, credit to them, everybody would do the same. But there is a real drive for change coming in the market now. And I think that's really coming from the growth of in-house teams. You know, in-house teams, certainly in the UK, I know, you know, the US is experiencing something similar. Never used to really be a thing. You know, the biggest in-house team in the Northwest was the Co-op when I joined about 8 years ago, and now there are a good sort of 5 or 6, certainly in the Northwest, who are significantly larger. You know, Chris will know, you know, down in London, you know, the in-house teams are growing massively. And what that means is there's more people like us knocking about who are looking, our jobs are to look at these relationships, but not just the fees, how things are being delivered. Are they listening to feedback? Are they discussing things? Are they responding to us as a client? Do they think about how they tailor communications with us? And how do they approach that relationship overall, taking it away from that kind of transactional approach of we send you bill, you pay bill? It's moving well away from that. And so I think it is starting to drive a bit of a rethink from the law firm side on how things can actually work.
And I'd agree with Helen there, of course. And you know, from my perspective, I've seen, you know, the reason I left working in private practice was because I was frustrated at just even through the work that I was doing, knowing that I could do it in a more structured and efficient way. And look, I'm inherently lazy, so I'll always look at how to do things faster. So therefore became incredibly frustrated that I could see how I could do it faster, but I had to do it the other way. So it didn't let me be as lazy as I wanted to be. I joke a little, just a little. But then moving over into certainly the financial industry, and particularly around the financial crisis time, I mean, everything was then geared to how do we work more effectively as our own team. And, you know, organizations that I've worked in and the size of the legal functions have been on par with major law firms. So we are running a law firm within some of these organizations, and it has a price tag to it. So suddenly with things like the financial crisis, we had to move forward in terms of bringing efficiencies to the way that we operated, and have been doing that for a long time now. So it is a little of kind of catch up, where the rest of the industry needs to move forward. But we recognize that one thing can't happen in one space without the other. We're like, it's symbiosis, right? We all operate together, and we need to certainly, to a certain extent, work together to make that change happen, so that we can start to align and think about what changes should be happening, and get behind them as a group. Because it's not going to happen if we all go off and do it individually, and it's not going to happen if law firms all go off and do it individually. We all are looking for the same thing. So where do we focus our effort first? But you know, and to Helen's point around that client law firm relationship piece, that's really starting to mature. And you know, I've certainly been back in the day. I mean, I've been in situations where we were being dropped by law firms because the amount of work wasn't coming through and the spend wasn't high enough. And you know, that's very much changed now. And it is about how can we work more effectively together to get more done. And ultimately, we want firms to maintain profitability, absolutely essential that we still have them attracting the right talent, able to do that highly strategic work that we want to do. But we need to do it with greater efficiency around and greater certainty. You know, ultimately, that's what I care about the most, is getting certainty around costs.
Which is a pretty consistent topic, and one I always saw when I was pitching for deals. What is the cost, and how much is that going to get stuck to? But one theme I think which actually just came out of that discussion, which was really interesting, was change. It seems like change is really starting to happen both from the law firm side and then also from the client side. A big part of that is technology, you know, whether it's legal technology or technology in general. And from a personal experience, when I was working, I did the traditional word checklist, and actually I used Legatics. I used Legatics on about 15 deals when I was a lawyer, and I noticed the change. It made my life a lot better. I got to the gym a little bit earlier than I otherwise would, which was nice. But I was able to also just deliver a better product to my clients. The documents were self-serve. They could get them at any time and not email me. If they wanted to see the status of the transaction, they could log on and see a dashboard and see where things are up to. They didn't have to ask me for the latest version 58 of the checklist, which was buried somewhere in my document management system. So I myself, on that kind of transactional level, saw that change. I saw it go from a very manual process to something a lot more efficient and a lot better. But I guess, has that filtered up? Have you seen that change start to hit at your level, in the relationship level, or conversely, is it filtering down? Are you saying, hey, we want this, we've seen it elsewhere, why aren't you delivering it? Chris, thoughts?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of tech, and a lot of that, it's definitely driving efficiencies, and we are getting smarter at the way that we do things. What I probably care about more is the data that sits behind all of that, because that's really going to help me inform what we do next. It is therefore looking at where we're taking longer to do things than we may ordinarily, or where others may be doing it. It's thinking about actually the cost that sits behind those pieces. It's identifying whether we've got the right processes in place. I'm largely kind of tech agnostic to a certain extent in terms of if, and look, we struggle to bring tech in, certainly in-house. We have got big challenges being able to do that from a just even budget and payment perspective, but also certainly some within the banking industry. Certainly we've got cyber controls and all sorts of other pieces that make it challenging for us to be able to bring technology in. So we're therefore reliant on our law firms to bring certain pieces to the table. But as I say, I'm less worried about what that tech is. I know it's going to help to drive an efficiency. I know it's going to help us to do something quicker, smarter, but I'm probably more interested in the data that sits on the other side of that, which lets us know whether we're doing the right thing. Because also, if I'm going to go forward and start to pitch to bring some tech into our organization, the more that I can build up that business case in terms of being able to talk about the efficiencies that can be driven, what's actually happening under the hood, and talk about it from that perspective, the better a chance I've got of bringing it in. And then also from a kind of continual improvement perspective, once we've got something through the door, we want to make sure that it is continuing to work, that we can improve, that we can enhance, that we do things better again. And again, we'll only get that if we've got that kind of base level data that can articulate how we are working, how effectively we're working, how efficiently we're working.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's interesting is what you measure as a client and how you define value and that approach. When we did our panel, there was a lot of tech sell. There was a lot of, this is really exciting, we're going to do this, we've got this idea, we've got, AI was obviously a buzzword like it still is now, we've got all of these tools. But my view is, well, what is that going to deliver to me, and how is that actually going to make a difference to the relationship? It might make a difference in a transaction, but is it going to deliver more value to us as an organization overall? Ultimately, all I want is an output. We have a clause in our engagement letters that says that irrespective of what you think you might be doing, your overriding principle when working with easyJet is that you will always take the best value approach. And I couldn't give two hoots as to how they actually do that. The important thing to me is that that is the principle that they're adhering to. However they deliver that is entirely up to them, whether it involves technology or not.
So is that almost the law firms being, to a degree, myopic, saying, I'm doing a deal for you, here are the things that will help with this specific deal, but on an aggregate level across all of your matters, you're saying, look, that's nice, I want to know, how is this going to affect everything globally? How am I going to get consistent data? How am I going to get consistent feeds? How will I consistently find documents? How will I consistently know the status of my transaction? So it almost sounds like the benefits of tech are being communicated at a transaction level, whereas they more need to be joined up and connected at a whole client level. Is that about right?
Yeah, and it creates a whole set of problems, doesn't it? Right? Like, how do you collaborate across multiple law firms without causing all sorts of competition issues and creating all sorts of challenges around there? How do you get everybody filling in the same spreadsheet, or providing you with exactly the same data set in the same format every single month without somebody else being able to see that data because you stuck it on a SharePoint? It's a really big challenge to kind of overcome, but it feels like sometimes maybe the sector, which has got many, many resources at its disposal, certainly more than in-house ever would, to look at this sort of challenge and say, well, how can we use technology rather than just putting badges onto RFP documents? How can we use the technology and the resources that we've got at our disposal to make the overall client experience better? Not just from our perspective in terms as in the law firm, the individual law firm, but as a collective of law firms who are supporting that client.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting challenge. And that feels to me like kind of the next place to really go.
Yeah, because it's that aggregated view that becomes the most important piece, because as much as there is all this tech available, we work with a number of law firms, you multiply number of tech pieces of tech by number of law firms, and already my head's spinning. I can't cope, right? And therefore, what I need to get is that higher level. I said we've cracked it. I mean, you look at banking, right? We've opened up banking now, so you can go into your bank account, your one bank account. You can see all your other bank accounts sat in the back of it. That's kind of what I need for legal. I need to go into one place where I can see what is going across the board at any given time, regardless of which law firm it is, regardless of which technology is being used. We're never going to get to a point where there's a, you may not like this one, but there's one piece of technology that is just used across the entire industry. I mean, it would be lovely, right? But there's always going to be somebody else that's doing something smarter, something faster. You've got people, monkeys on your back that are coming your direction, which is fine. And we need that competitiveness to be able to innovate within the industry. So it's the right thing to do. What we need to create is that wrapper that goes around it. It means everybody can just plug in. And at the end of the day, I mean, very selfishly, it's all about the client. It is all about the client. And that's not just a problem of the industry. It is something that certainly we as an organization at HSBC, if we're looking to do anything, the question that we always have to ask ourselves is, how does this benefit our customer? And that any business case, any opportunity that we're looking at doing, anything that we want to do in terms of a different way, it's a very, very simple question, but it's a question that's very rarely asked. What is it that it's going to do for our customer? So everything within legal, within HSBC, I've got to think about what that does for an HSBC client. Is it going to bring efficiencies? Is it going to put more money in their pocket? All those pieces are things that we need to do. And I don't think we've done enough of asking ourselves that question across the legal industry to kind of fulfill that brief to a certain extent. Because what we do want is clarity. What we do want is transparency, and we want simplicity. And everything is kind of there, but it's just disconnected, is my view at the moment.
Okay, so there's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of things which have been promised to do things, but it's hard to see how that's actually affected thing at a global level. Some standardization would help, but obviously that has the problem of you don't get a chance to use new things. So it sounds like there is a bit of almost a middle layer needed for that data to pull into in some way, to have all your law firms, say, put all the contracts into one place and then to pull from. Sounds like that in itself for you would be quite impactful. Is there anything else in particular you think tech or legal tech could help with? I mean, the standardization's good. Going down to that individual deal level, I know you've got to look after the in-house teams, make sure that they're happy. What do you hear from them at that kind of more deal level is making their life better and their life happier? Because that's, I'm sure, a key part of a metric for you guys as to how your panel law firms are going. So they're the ones at that coalface seeing a bit of the tech. What do you see at their level that is important to them?
I think, so a lot of the feedback that we get is around information. It's just a different level of information. It's about whether or not the firms that we're working with understand our business, understand what's important to us, and incorporate that thinking into whatever piece of work that they're doing, whether it's a transaction, whether it's a commercial contract, whether it's, some sort of piece of employment work. Quite often there'll be a relationship and it will be led by a partner, and they'll absorb all of this information that hopefully the client is sending to them to say, this is our strategy, this is what we're thinking about, this is how we communicate, and this is how we work. And then there's a gap between that partner and the person who's actually executing the piece of work. And what that means is that the client ends up frustrated because you're like, I've told them these are our priorities. I've told them I want no more than 6 bullet points on any matter, no matter how big it is. I've told them the executive summary is absolutely king. And then what you actually get back is a transaction that hasn't considered the organization specifically. You get back 17 pages of really detailed, complex legal notes, and the client sat there feeling frustrated. And because they've done their bit, hopefully they've done their bit. I'm speaking for us here. Hopefully they've done their bit. And then that hasn't translated through. And so actually for me, it's also about creating that consistency internally, because it shouldn't just be reliant on emails to ping around an organization. So easyJet have just shared their strategy, or, you know, HSBC have got this update on how they want us to approach these things. It should be, this is the universe of information we hold about our clients, but it's actually valuable to the client, not their billing levels and their utilization rates on that client and what their recoveries look like and everything else. That's not important to the client. What's important to the client is that you understand our strategy and that you understand who we are as a business. And so I think actually there's an element of that would be so valuable to at an execution level, definitely.
Yeah. And I guess my view is same flavor but slightly different, but it's that what our lawyers respond well to is when their life is made easier for them, right? This is fundamentally the piece. And that is, to Helen's point, therefore, understanding what we're trying to achieve as an organization, but also the pressures that our lawyers are under. So having that understanding of the business that they work with, how that business operates, what the commercial drivers are for that business, what the strategic ambitions are for that business, is only ever going to really help, because that's what our lawyers are having to deal with. That's what they're on they have got their own customers and clients that they've got to service, and nor that the law firms understand, and that those that we work with within the law firms understand what that dynamic is, or what the ambitions are, or what the strategic aims are, then the better that service can be. And it's to that point of, you know, does that client want to have a 15-page briefing document, or do they just want half a page or a very nice bulleted email that talks about what we need? And I get it, it's hard to achieve, because you getting to understand the kind of commercial drivers for an organization can be difficult. Understanding risk appetite can be difficult. And what we as lawyers want to do is make sure that we're covering all bases, right? Here's every eventuality that could possibly happen. And last statement is, so there you go, pick which one you want to do. That's not necessarily what we want to get on the other side of it. It's like we've eliminated these 7 alternatives because we know that that is not what you, HSBC, would do. Therefore, we've whittled it down and we focused on these 3. We probably expect the 2 of these to be the most favorable ones, but these are the implications of making a decision against A, B, and C. Much better than here's our 15 pages. If only it was 15 pages. So to be much more supportive in that way, but therefore understand that need. And it might be that actually there is one part of the business where they do want the 15-page report in great detail that talks about every possible outcome. But building that dynamic and having that understanding is really going to help. So it does come back to me for that bit of, let's make the life easier for the in-house lawyer. They are up against it. Right, they are super up against it. So anything that you can do from service delivery perspective that gives them transparency, visibility, and simplicity is only ever going to be welcome.
So it sounds like tech basically has a role here of tying the 2 sides closer together. It seems like at the moment there's a bit of a bridge. Everyone has a different bridge. The bridge is a bit rickety in places, it's a bit long in others.
Some's not a bridge, it's a slide.
Okay, there we go, it's a slide. So we have a slide, some made of rubber, some made of tiles, not a comfy slide. So it seems like the big part of tech here is how can we use tech, or whatever kind of tech it is, and it could just be a simple email. How can we tie everything closer together so you have information at your fingertips, so things become standardized, so things are simpler to get. To throw a spanner in the works here, because it's kind of fun, is the security side, especially on the banks, Chris, is really high. They're onerous. They require, the data to be stored in Fort Knox and not accessible by anyone. It kind of makes it quite difficult sometimes to then use. So how do you overcome that barrier? Because that's quite a big barrier to that goal, right? Of trying to tie 2 sides together. Where's the give and take? Or not so much give and take. Where is the opportunities to improve that?
Answers on a postcard, please. No, I do have views. Look, it is complicated. It's potentially overly complex, but I also understand what we're trying to achieve. I think there's a bit that needs to be done in terms of the industry needs to come together to talk about what this looks like, because I'm pretty certain anybody that goes to HSBC will be faced with the same at Barclays, at Citi, at Deutsche, whoever you're going to pick up the phone to, or you're going to try and do an implementation with, you'll be faced with the same set of questions, or they'll be same but different. So in fact, actually, can we just agree, maybe in an ideal world, that you only have to go through this process once and then you're kind of approved for the industry? We're all up against the same regulators, therefore have all the same requirements based back on us. It means maybe we can do a bit to standardize and harmonize, so it takes maybe some of the pain out, and if you've done it once, you've done it once. That would be an ideal, helpful piece. I do think there's a bit of us needing to push back in terms of actually what is required. There's decision trees that sit at the back of a lot of those questions that can explode a process to take months versus less months. I don't think we'll ever get to weeks. But being able to push back certainly on some of those and make sure that those are being answered in the right way, I think will certainly help. We're all relatively new to going through this process, so finding our way a little bit, but means that actually there's bear traps there that we really quite easily fall into just by hitting the wrong no or the wrong yes. We're stuck, right? We are where we are, but I think it will evolve over time, but I don't think that's going to be done by us trying to tackle it in isolation. Actually, we need firms to come together, we need in-house teams to come together, we need tech to come together, learn from our collective experiences in this process, and then think about what we can do to either challenge or bring efficiencies to it. It's not going to happen overnight, but if we can get a kind of quantum of us looking at it, then at least it becomes a little bit easier. There needs to be something that pulls it together instead of having all these isolated incidents. That means we fundamentally prevent tech from moving forward and from innovation happening.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think for us, we look at the bank a lot as kind of the gold standard, whether how our cybersecurity teams feel about that or not. But when I'm looking at different technology for us as an organization, I will always look at whether or not they've got banking clients, because you know full well that they have jumped through some serious hoops to get those clients. But I think it's also, I think that conversation piece is absolutely right, because the digital safety, cybersecurity side of things, they are kind of the new lawyers in a lot of ways, in that nobody's really talking to them. They're sort of doing their job. They're not really kind of helping people, it appears, on the outside. And I think that conversation has to open up to include them. Like, in-house teams have worked so hard to become those really effective business partners. And there will be absolutely cybersecurity teams who are nailing this, but they're not all nailing it. And I think they are the barrier that we need to open up that conversation with, if we want to take things forward, because we can't cut them out. There's simply no way to cut them out of that conversation. And I think it absolutely needs to be a dialogue that's open between all of those different teams to deliver something that really works.
And it can be done. We've done it in fintech, right? So we've been able to change the banking industry, heavily regulated, personal data being accessible or at least managed effectively so that it will comply with some of those requirements. We need whoever did that, those teams that were out there working on the fintech bit, to come and actually let's do it on the legal tech side, right? So whatever geniuses were sat there working their way through this, right? Where are you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one, because from a vendor perspective, we obviously have our law firms look at us and say, look, how's our security? But you're right, it's a pass-through thing, isn't it? They have said that, well, HSBC or easyJet have said these are the requirements. And I guess they're struggling from a similar problem in that they have lots of different clients themselves, all who themselves have different requirements. So maybe it's something that standardization, I think, could help with. Do you, there is the ISO standards for a lot of this, but perhaps it's much more of a, look, the banks have got together, or the law firms have got together and said, for us to use you need X, Y, and Z. If you tick X, Y, and Z, you're good to go. You've passed that gate, come into the happy land of law firm client relationships. So it sounds like we need to get a working group together to try and solve that.
Volunteers.
Yeah. Anyone on the call to volunteer? Raise it in the Q&A afterwards. So I guess that leads us to actually an interesting point, is we've kind of, like I said, the old way of working was a bit static, a bit shut off, a bit unrepresentative of how everyone wanted to work. It's changing, it's getting there, and tech, whether it's legal or otherwise, is helping. And if it goes well, look, there could be huge impacts, right? Like we could get a lot more of a seamless delivery. We can get people out the door earlier, especially in summer British summertime. You know, you can slide till 11 o'clock. It's fantastic. But I guess the question really for me is, what happens now? Say we get to that promised land, and we start working towards it. Where do you see that going? Like, how's that going to change in the future? If law firms are delivering you a much more coherent product, it's simple, it's in one place, what then? Like, what else happens? Because you know, change always keeps happening. The thing that you didn't like becomes the thing you liked, and then everything keeps mixing up. So I guess the fun part, the future ball gazing, what's next if that problem gets solved, or how is this going to change?
I think every time you improve something, you discover further improvements that can be made. You know, you turn over the rock, you solve the problem, and lo and behold, another rock appears. And so, you know, I think the relationship piece is absolutely huge, and actually sorting that out and getting it to a cohesive place is really valuable. But what that's going to throw up is even more data sets. What it's going to throw up is more interrogation of data sets, because we're not going to be spending time pulling together and looking at how these relationships can work better, because they're going to be enabled by technology and they're all going to be absolutely amazing. But what that's going to then throw up is, let's start to look under the skin of this data. Let's start to think about how are we really maximizing the time? What's our view? And you're sort of starting to take on that DE&I type space of, why have you got associates working 22 hours a day on my matter when it's not urgent? And you're going to start asking those questions that are going to challenge at another level. You know, why have you not got, you know, appropriate ethnic representation across your organization? You're going to start really interrogating some of those data points that you then have access to. And it's the right thing to do, because that is what's going to drive the next level of change in the organizations and in the sector. So for me, I think that's where it will start to move to.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's absolutely what will start to be the future. I mean, look, where we're at the moment, we're kind of moving from, you know, we talk about having strategic partnerships with our law firms. I think we're on a sliding scale as to where we are based on the firm that you're working with, as to whether you've started to achieve that strategic piece. What we'll then start to move towards is a more transformational relationship, where we will fundamentally be changing the industry. Because if we are starting to come together and work together to solve problems, we have got, as Helen says, that data set that sits there that we can then be starting to make more informed decisions. We can fundamentally start to change and rewrite what the legal industry should look like. You know, we've got alternate legal service providers coming in as part of that balance that sits with law firms, that's sitting with technology. Everybody's kind of vying for position, and it will start to blur over time. Already we're seeing a blurring around who provides what within that space. You know, I think I've always said that law firms will look very different in 10 years time, but I keep on just pushing out the 10 years as well.
It's like nuclear fusion over here.
Like, in another 10 years, we'll see a very different law firm. But yeah, already we are. We've got firms that have now got consulting services sat within them, that have got technology and innovation hubs that sat within them. Who would have thought we'd have had the likes of Fuse sat within A&O and Mishcon with their labs and everything else that's going on. Already there is, if you look back, firms have significantly changed. And it's just the beginning of that. So what a law firm will look like in 10 to 15 years time will be very, very different. And I think those that have jumped onto the kind of transformational bandwagon and have built that relationship with their clients, where they can start to use that kind of looking glass to find out what's happening next, can start to kind of shape that future together. Because we've all, as again we've said, we've all got experiences. And we've all got learnings, and therefore being able to apply that in a more collaborative way to be able to define what next looks like, but also be able to do that in a way that we can do it at pace, because the more people that get behind it, the cheaper it becomes to get things done, the more the risk is shared, and then the pace just picks up. We'll be able to actually make bigger change and transformation than we have done to date. So I think that will be the kind of next evolution, certainly from my perspective, and it will be driven by what will become a much bigger data set. We've not even tapped into the information and data that law firms already have. And I don't underestimate the challenges there are to looking at that data. I know what it's like looking at my own data. But if you think they have got 6-minute incremental views of everything that has been done for X number of years, the analysis that could be done across that layer of information, and what that would tell us would be fascinating. And I've always wanted to, I always want to know what law firms know about us as a client, and that's not just in terms of the work that they do for us, but also they know which newsletters our lawyers open, how long they spend on certain pages within their intranet, their internet sites, what they're continually asking for information about. That's a whole other data set there that helps us think about how we certainly how I could better service. Oh, and Siri's joined in as well. Siri, talking about technology, Siri wants in. But if we start to think about how we can use that information to provide our lawyers with a better environment within which to work in. I think also, Helen, when we've got that kind of legal ops hat on, you are providing a service also to your lawyers by creating the right ecosystem for them, and things like that could help to inform what that could look like. We tap into that data, we start to do proper analysis around that, and we do it where there's a quantum of information, and we've got insights that we've never had before. Went off on a data tangent there.
No, it's a good tangent to go off into, and then I just want to just drag it back a little bit. So
right.
you got to go back and forth, right? We can't go linear; it's less fun.
Thanks, Chris.
So the data set's the key, right? I think we're quite clear that you guys, there's a lot of data, you want more access to it, but there is still a lot of work to be done there. But then also a lot of the data sets that you could get aren't in data sets. I think of like those word tables that lawyers have used to manage all your transactions. So if you wanted to say to them, look, how many sale and purchase agreements have you done for me across the years? They probably can't tell you. Or if they want to know, look, how many conditions is there generally to most of our financing? That data is stuck in a Word document. And that therefore requires lawyers and law firms to do two things. One, to start using systems that are designed to capture, record, and store that data. But then B, also become more data literate, because that's something that I noticed a lot when I was working, was I was a tech guy because I could use Excel. Probably a low bar to being the tech guy, but hey, it was what it was. And it's because I had an accounting degree and understood numbers and could use Excel, so data. But those two things to me always seem tricky. And when I was working, I tried to really encourage other people to use tech, especially legal tech and Legatics, because I thought it made their lives easier. But it was always look, I don't have time, the partner doesn't really interested. And so it's hard to kind of build that bridge there. So I guess 3 questions come out of that. How do lawyers get upskilled on the data? How do you get them to use more of those systems? And really, does it mean you have to be the ones mandating? You have to be the one saying, use this. That's just it. You have to learn it. Is that where the change happens from you guys, or what is it?
It's really hard to be those people and to demand it and to get consistency. But I think it's to me, the absence of data literacy within this profession is effectively a change management piece. You can't just go, boom, here's a massive data set. You are all going to get to grips with this, and this is how it's going to happen. Legal tech in general is almost entirely tailored around the fact that lawyers use Word and that they love Word and they're comfortable with Word and they're very comfortable with the Office suite, Excel notwithstanding. And so the reality is that what will happen, and what I think should happen, is that technology will take baby steps. And in those 10 years that Chris refers to, what will happen is that they will be in a much more data literate place without realizing it, because the evolution of technology will have guided them to that point. Because if we try and go for a big bang we're going to stick it on the SQE and the LPC, and they're all going to pop out as, little data monsters. That's not going to transform how the whole industry works. What's going to transform the industry is incremental change.
Yeah. And look, I didn't get into legal because I loved numbers, right? That was not my main driver for choosing it as a career. I liked words, right? And I liked language, and I liked reading, and all those pieces. So we're not going to fundamentally be able to make that change. And I battle with myself into should we be forcing that on our lawyers to be doing? I'd much rather they were doing the legal work. But there needs to be an understanding. Absolutely, totally agree with that. But then let's bring the right people in. Let's bring data scientists in through the door that can start to think about what we're doing. And as Helen says, tech will start to pick up that job of actually being able to capture the data and do the analysis on the other side of it. And that's maybe where we need to start thinking. It means maybe less that I care about the data, but I do care about the analytics that comes out the other side. So I don't care what machine's done the work in the background. I certainly care more about data from my side. I want to know what's going on within legal. I want to be able to interrogate it. From your side, I'll quite happily take the insight for now. From a law firm side, I'll quite happily take the insights. But of course, that means you've got to do a lot of sorting out behind the scenes. But there's a bit of me that is, let's bring the people in that do this best and that's happening. We are seeing data scientists pop up within law firms and starting to look at what they would probably see as the most exciting data mess they've ever seen in their lives and can't wait to get it sorted out. Right? They're thrilled.
Well, I mean, systems and processes plays a big part of it, right? The law firms have all gone on that journey of the 90s. Hey, there's the software all of a sudden, let's use it. And then all of a sudden you're still using it 10, 15 years later. It needs to be updated. So yeah, I'm sure there are data scientists out there absolutely licking their lips. One final topic, just before we get into the Q&A. And if you do have questions, feel free to put them into the chat and we will touch on them in 5 or so minutes, is to really just do something that's trending on LinkedIn. And for all those who have been on LinkedIn, this will be a post that and a question you've seen many times, and they're probably going, Ryan, why did you ask this? But hey, ChatGPT and all the large language models, they're all the rage. I think we just can't ignore the elephant in the room. That's going to change things, definitely. How and when?
Well, that's the $1 million question.
Exactly. I got to finish with a bang.
That's a whole other session. That could see us right through for another hour.
You got 2 minutes, Chris or Helen. Summarize it for us, and we'll go into Q&A.
Look, right. It's fundamentally, and anyone that has gone in and played with ChatGPT can see what it's capable of, right? But also can see the risks that sit around it and the challenges that there are. But we've now got there's not a law firm that I've not spoken to that is not thinking about how they can be bringing that to the table. HSBC have recently put out kind of our position and where we are when it comes to ChatGPT, and what was really encouraging, certainly from my perspective, who is interested in this and wants to see change happen, their statement is not a no. It's not a yes, get cracking, but it's not a no. It's be careful with what you do and what information is put in there, and it's no client information, of course, no client information, but we are out and investigating what can happen next. So that's from and we've already talked about the cybersecurity controls and the regulatory requirements and everything else that sits across a bank. And if that is a bank that's putting itself out there to say that's what we want to look at doing, then it just clearly marks the way that we're going. And as I say, every law firm I've spoken to is thinking about what that means for them when it comes to using ChatGPT. And why would we not? It will free lawyers up to do the more strategic type of work if we can use it to start to be the basis for any of the documents that we want to produce. I mean, it's crazy the things that it can do. It's also crazy how it can be manipulated to give you the result that you want out the other side. It's fresh, it's new, it's exciting. We get distracted by the shiny toys as always.
That's what I was looking for.
I think we're learning, right?
It's such a huge leap forwards, and I think that's the really big thing. It's not that ChatGPT, whatever number it is the finished product. To me, it's the fact that it's such a massive leap forwards, and I think that what it will do when it takes its next iteration or 2 or 3 is it will reshape how we start to think about education and how we start to think about training and growth and learning, because it is going to look at that whole of that training layer and where you learn all of your skills and the hard yards that you put in at the beginning of your career. It's going to transform all of that. And I think that's the really interesting piece, kind of more broadly, is around, well, you know, the challenge will be there for really good people. The challenge will always be there, and there will always be interesting work to do. But the question is, how do you manage something like ChatGPT around a broader workforce? And so I think there's two really big work streams that, if they aren't going on in organizations, should definitely be going on now. One is absolutely that cybersecurity piece, and the other one is, what impact is this going to have on our workforce? And you know, I think it's really, really interesting.
It's good, and half the reason I went for it is, quite interestingly, it takes us full circle, right? Like, the traditional relationship is now, what could it look like again in the future? What will legal tech change? It's interesting how, like you were saying, these step changes. There was some legal tech out there 10, 15 years ago, the NLP tools, and people said, oh, this is going to change due diligence, but it took some time. So it's interesting that this is, as I think, Helen, you rightly pointed out, improvements come and they come with problems, and then you solve those, and there keep being new things to solve. So a really interesting place, I think, all around for the industry, which is a good time to go to questions, because we have a few. First one is, what more could law firms do to articulate to clients the value they're providing from the technology that they're using? How do you articulate those benefits? Because it sounds like they're doing it, but at the transaction level. So what can you do to really hammer home the benefits?
I think it's really interesting. Why does the client need to know?
Mm-hmm.
Because if the client is getting the output that they want and the law firm is delivering more efficiently, presumably that's preserving their margin. It's making them more competitive, and it meant that they won the work in the first place. So why does the client need to know? That would be my big question.
And I wouldn't disagree. I mean, ultimately, if we're looking at the pricing of things, you know, we want to put more efficient fee arrangements in place, moving away from the early rate. You can price your tech into your EFA. I don't necessarily need to see what's happening. Where I do care is if there's something that we're missing by not using something. You know, definitely want to understand the learnings of using technology and thinking about how we could deploy that ourselves. I'm interested in knowing it from that perspective. But ultimately, like Helen says, I'll pay what I need to pay for that work to be done, and I'll pay what I think that work is worth. And if that has got tech in the back end of it, brilliant.
It's a bit like how they don't tell you they're going to use Word to do most of it.
They need to know.
Yeah,
love to know what price. Love to know what price they put on Word.
And maybe what version they're using, but otherwise, as long as they're just doing the work, they don't say they use Word to use it. So I think that probably speaks a few volumes. Maybe 20 years ago, that was a thing. Hey, we don't type things out for you. We have Word. It's a new technology to use.
Amazing.
Which actually comes to the opportunity for tech. Like, I think, Chris, you actually had touched on it, which is, there is so much out there, right? I know there's been attempts to try to bring it together in app stores for you to understand. Do you go to your law firms and say, hey, I have a huge data set of documents. What's the best NLP tool to extract the data from them? Do you do that? Do you look to your law firms for that?
I love that you think we know our problem well enough to be able to articulate it like that. You know, we've got a bit of work to do. We would certainly, if we are thinking about, and we do, of course we do, we've got our own strategic IT tech roadmaps and what we want to achieve. And we will talk to our firms. You've got, firms have got a much broader view as to implementation around these technologies, what's worked, again, what hasn't worked. Of course we talk, but I'd also go and talk to Helen. And find out what they've been using and what interaction's been over on their side. We are a community, and really leverage each other's knowledge and expertise and experience, but would use all of it, not just taking certainly law firms' perspectives into consideration, but they know they'll have seen multiple instances of these technologies being deployed, have also put it through its paces, being able to use it within their own organizations. So of course we'd lean on them to find out how things work.
Absolutely. And I think that's it. I completely agree with that, because it is an ecosystem, and we do all talk to each other, including to the law firms, but within the law firms there's an ecosystem. And so if we're considering technology, we look to their IT teams as well, and we look to their technology teams to say, not just from a lawyer experience and from the relationship partner inputting their spreadsheet or their outputs or whatever it is every month. How did you guys find this? Like, what were the pitfalls that you experienced when you were implementing it? And that gives us a really good steer on, you know, what we should be watching out for as well. So it's hugely valuable.
That makes sense. Another question, again, someone's put these in a great order because they all relate really nicely. And this one's actually about reluctance. And I saw it when I was a lawyer. I went, hey, I want to use some tech to help you do your deal and actually give you structured data. And they went, I gotta log in. I don't really want to log in. It's a lot of work. I have to kind of learn it. Just send me the Word doc and just get on with the job. And so I remember seeing that kind of like actual reluctance. And the law firm has to be an odd way to say to the client, we've got something better. This will help you. Can we use it? It's kind of odd. It's kind of like, I want to help you, but you don't want me to let you help you. So how do you overcome that barrier?
So I'd have a question there in terms of actually, well, why are they resistant, right? Can they just not be bothered to do it again? Or is there cyber controls? Is there budget challenges? Like, there's something that will stop doing that. Because fundamentally, yes, we're interested in why would we not want that information. I would dive into finding out what that resistance really is, because that's probably where you can offer more help to drive it forward. Because I would imagine there's something else sitting behind that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. That is exactly what I was going to say. And I think the only other thing is, you know, if there's, are you talking to the right person?
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you are, you know, a lot of lawyers are a long way along this change curve, especially if they're in-house, but they're not always all the way along. And actually, if you can get somebody from legal ops who can really see the value in that, or if you've got a data savvy lawyer who can see the value in what is being put into there, then actually those are the people to maybe talk to, and then you can start a little bit of a pincer movement on the wider team. But I think fundamentally, if somebody's saying no, it's almost certainly going to be a controls issue rather than an absence of appetite issue.
Yeah.
I find you go here.
I was going to say, always follow the money, right? Who cares most about the money? And then you'll find out who's going to be able to make the decision, or who's going to do something about it. And it's not necessarily it's not always going to be the lawyer. They just want to get the bill paid. They just want the work done, and we want to get the bill paid at the end of the day. Follow that chain, because you will find a COO, a Helen, that is sat there going, what, you mean there's $1 million on the table? We're not going to leave money on the table, right? There's an efficiency to be delivered. We are going to be in, right? So to have that conversation.
I see the point about following the bread trail. The problem is the bread trail has to start right at the bottom. And quite often that was me as the associate saying, I want to use this. And then the deal timeline was tight. The thing needed to be delivered tomorrow, 5 hours ago. And I get a bit dissuaded. I go, I don't know who the person is. How do I find them? I give up.
If you are effectively managing your relationship, you will have the relationship team that's in place to have that more strategic conversation at a higher level. So you would have somebody that would be able to actually take that conversation off your plate and take it to somebody that cares about it. So law firms that are effectively managing their relationships would have another route through that takes it out of the transactional conversation. Because you're right, it's not going to get delivered on that transactional conversation, because the lawyer you're working with might just want this done. I'm not going to do it again for another month. So why would I think about it? Use the broader relationship to make that happen. There are other routes in.
Yeah, and use the broader relationship with the client. I don't have an issue with a junior associate messaging me and saying, we didn't get it happening on this, but this is something that you could have had. And let me know if it's something that you would like to see going forward. I've got absolutely no issue with that. I think all structures are a lot flatter on the client side. You won't tend to get the same sort of hierarchies. And actually the law firms that we want to work with are the law firms where that approach is seen as an asset rather than as a liability.
Which, again, honestly, these questions are perfectly structured. Because the next one is, do you actually see that? Do you see law firms going out to you and saying, what do you need and what do you value? Like, and it sounds like you would like that. You would like that a lot. You'd love that associate to reach out to you and say, hey, I'm sick of sending you a word checklist. Are you sick of it? Yes, I am too. I've got a solution. You would love to do it. I guess how much do you see that though? How much do you see that proactive approach from your panel law firms saying, hey, this can help?
I've got, yes, it happens. But two, I've also created an environment where that will happen. So as part of kind of regular relationship meetings, we'll do every once in a while, I'll do a deep dive into kind of innovation and technology and ask, what are you doing? What are we not doing? What are you doing with others that we should be thinking about doing? So I've made it part of the dialogue anyway. So probably the wrong ones to ask. I know Helen's very, very similar as well in terms of managing rosters of firms, right? We've created that environment.
I think we've created that environment, but I think there's also an element of that proactivity, them coming to us and just saying, we are going to listen to you. We're here to hear. We're taking an hour and we are just going to listen. You tell us what it is that you want. And I don't think that proactivity happens enough. I think we create a really strong environment for it, but I don't think they proactively push it enough. And with a less managed in-house legal team, it almost certainly won't happen.
Okay, so I think a couple of big themes really that's come out of this is that you guys want to be tighter with your law firms in many ways, whether it's on the tech and the data side, but then at that human level, that relationship. You pay me money, try to understand from me what I care about and what matters to me, and obviously tech has a role in that, but it comes down to sometimes the old beer in the pub, doesn't it? Sit down and find out what's important. And actually, the last question I have on here, it somewhat relates to that, is the alternative law firms. Obviously, there's a few more of them coming out. I imagine for them, that's something that's very interesting to them. How do I grab the attention of you, the potential client, and how do you raise that awareness? So what do you guys see on that side in the alternative law firm space?
Do you use ALSPs at all, Chris?
Yes, we do. And we're just in fact doing I'm putting in place a new panel for the ALSPs. And it's not as if I'm going to launch this panel and suddenly all our lawyers will be like, brilliant, we've been waiting for this. I've got a load of work that's going to go out to an alternate. We've got a long way to go. But what I do have is some really innovative lawyers within our function that have already been thinking about. I had this conversation with them whether they're also inherently lazy as well, to thinking about how they could do things in smarter ways. They weren't. They were looking at new ways of doing things, but had really successfully implemented alternative ways of doing legal work through the use of alternate legal service providers, sometimes in partnership with a law firm, but have been able to bundle work and look at process and think about how we could do it in a smarter way, and have really successfully implemented, which means I've now got a kind of team of experts within the organization that as we do move forward with more work to ALSPs, we can talk about how we've done it, how we've identified the opportunities and how we've implemented it. And most importantly, it's not me or legal ops or change and transformation that have that conversation. It's our actual lawyers that have been able to talk to their peers about how to do things differently. So it's not as if we're going to see suddenly a wholesale change and suddenly a massive amount of work, like literally the green button is lit and there's your ALS. Firms go mad. We'll have to put a bit more of a structure around how we get to that point of identifying that work and sending it there. But as we get into that rhythm, it's going to grow. And we will start to think about other ways of doing things. And back to that previous question around, well, what's next? That's a part of the what's next, because there's this whole space where we can really think about doing things in different ways. And what ALSs do better than law firms have historically is they are there to continually improve. And that is fundamentally one of the biggest pieces that they're driving towards, and it's through use of technology, process improvement, thinking about the people that they're using, upskilling, offshoring, all the other stuff that we've been talking about for a long time. They've built their organizations on that premise, which means there's a huge opportunity there.
Definitely. And I think the biggest challenge to it is understanding your own processes.
Totally.
I mean, if there was one thing that I would love an LSP just to come in and do, is just document our processes, create our playbooks, and then they can take what they want.
Totally. So one service provider panel, first one to do that.
Exactly.
You're in.
So there's the path to riches. And with that, it is almost 10:30. It's about to tick over. So that concludes the webinar. Chris, Helen, thank you very much for joining. Really great insights. Good to learn things that I probably should have known when I was a lawyer. So maybe not too late. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and thank you very much for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.
Thanks all. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.